Good evening. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Ishan Russell. Tonight, we focus on the third India-Africa Forum Summit that is underway in New Delhi. Representatives of 54 African nations, including heads of state and governments of around 40 countries, are participating. Now, there are two documents that are being negotiated. One is a political document, which will talk of the political partnership between India and Africa. It will touch upon global and regional issues. The other, a framework document of cooperation, will talk about the development partnership of Africa and a line of credit by India to African nations. Tonight, though, we focus on the bigger picture of what results this engagement gets and the future roadmap for the African subcontinent and the Indian subcontinent's relationship. I'll request my panelists to be very crisp with the answers as we have a range of issues to cover. And joining me tonight are Siddharth Vardarajan, founding editor of The Wire, Ambassador Jitendra Kumar Tripathi, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs, Tom Thomas, CEO of Praxis Institute of Participatory Practices, and Professor Ajay Kumar Dubey from the Center for African Studies at JNU.
We are not having the relationship of giver or taker or donor and receiver, but we have partnership in progress. And that is what it matters, so that other party also feels that, yes, we are not doing any favor to them, but we are helping because they are our brothers. So this is most crucial issue that we have emphasized.
All right. Siddharth, I want to quickly come across to you because the earlier India-Africa Forum summits were smaller affairs, 12 to 14 countries engagement with those. With 54 countries participating, over 40 heads of state and government over here, what is India hoping to achieve? What is the thought that is behind this? All right, we seem to have lost that connection with Siddharth. We'll try to establish that once again. Dr. Chaulia, putting the same question to you.
Yeah, I think the thought behind it is that we have grown in stature over the last 7-8 years since the first India-Africa Forum Summit was held. We have become more ambitious in terms of our foreign policy under Prime Minister Modi. We want to be what Foreign Secretary Jaishankar says, a leading nation, and leading especially among emerging nations and developing countries. And all this means that, we have greater convening power, pulling power than before. And earlier, the invites were kept to a select group with whom we had very strong ties and with whom we did practical stuff. But now we believe that we need to have a continental reach across Africa. And I think that's the right way forward because at the end of the day, to become a great power, India needs to be present across and it needs to be omnipresent in Africa. And the presence of so many of them here in Delhi this week, it signifies some kind of acknowledgement that India has arrived on a big stage. And therefore, I think although we always emphasize equality, at the same time, it's a kind of a equality of unequals in the sense that India has greater capabilities than most African countries. So yes, I agree with the ambassador that it's not giver and taker. We also need to learn from them many things. But at the same time, there are many aspects, economic, strategic, political, where we can give so much. And therefore, I think it's that kind of moment which heralds, I think I call it a watershed in the history of relations among emerging nations.
Absolutely. The private sector, of course, will be the one that will do that engagement between the subcontinent and the African continent. Dr. Chaulia, has enough been happening on that front? Is the pace enough? And this could, as Siddharth was pointing out, could really prove to be a fillip in a sense over there.
There are some large Indian companies that are invested there, but also I think the key push has to come from small and medium enterprises because that's where a lot of trade happens, nitty-gritty, which if you add up cumulatively can transform the current bilateral trade way beyond the $70 billion we are right now. Because a lot of small, medium enterprises want to import from Africa and also export specialized products. And all they need is actually exposure. And this, our chambers need to do more of it, chambers of commerce. Of course, the diplomatic missions must enable it, and even educational institutions, because we need to do this on a consistent basis for them to realize that there is value to be gained through exchange. And right now, I think what has happened is most of the experience of Indian businesses there have been positive, barring one or two. and we don't have the negative, ill will that many Africans have developed towards the Chinese.
Okay.
So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to make inroads in small and medium enterprises, and of course our services sector, agriculture productivity. That's another area which is critical, because there are parts of Africa, especially in Ethiopia today, which are facing drought, and we need to help them, especially with transferring some of these, and of course I agree with Tom that we need to do a lot more with capacity building of civil society actors, transfer of knowledge about democracy promotion, conflict resolution. These are the things which India has done, relatively speaking, very well in among all developing countries, and we have an advantage in it, and I think the Africans will love sharing it with us.
All right. Also, the fact that as far as from a security standpoint, now we've talked about the Somali pirates. That was an issue that keeps coming up over and over again. Maritime security. But Dr. Chaulia, does India have the capacity to, the capability to play that kind of a role in the Indian Ocean that is often envisaged, that is often talked about by columnists?
Absolutely. I think our Navy is in an expansion mode. We have the, the Western Indian Ocean is basically the east coast of Africa. And it's important, many African countries are part of the Indian Ocean Rim Association. So we have both trade, which is reflected in the blue economy concept of Prime Minister Modi, but also increasingly security cooperation. We had earlier countered piracy, sent our Navy there. And I think we also will need to chip in with helping resolve some of these regional conundrums that have created and spawned terrorism over time. And frankly, I must say that India must also, at some level, position itself as an antidote to the Western types of interventions that have actually exacerbated conflict and terrorism on the continent.
Okay.
So I think in all these metrics, we are more acceptable, and we can play a bigger role. President Buhari is attempting very hard since taking power in Nigeria to counter Boko Haram. Islamic State also, remember, it has two branches, one in Egypt and one in Libya. And they are so-called Islamic State branches also in South Asia. So I think at some level, we are dealing with essentially different faces of the same monster. So I think one is countering terrorism at the UN level through conventions and treaties and getting African votes to back us up, our long call for it. But the other is practical action on the ground, especially to share intelligence, of course, and also to think about how the maritime commerce, as it increases, it can also raise the threat levels in terms of movement of dangerous commodities, as well as weapons and illicit drugs, which have been moving. So on all these counts, security cooperation with Africa is going to be essential.
Final comments, gentlemen, because we just have about 3 minutes. And I'll ask you to outline perhaps one fact that you would like both India and Africa to be working on. And when we talk Africa, it's not just the one continent, it's 54 countries, and they all are pursuing their own national interests. So in terms of out of this kind of an engagement, what do we want?
We need freer trade, especially with the sub-regions of Africa, the SADC community in Southern Africa, the East Asian community, East African community, as well as the ECOWAS, which is in West Africa. And these are three sub-regions that need to be integrated. And we also need to support and strengthen African Union institutions at the pan-continental level. Because at the end of the day, if we can build the capacity in peacekeeping as well as in trade facilitation at the African Union level, I think we will be in a sweet spot insofar as India-Africa relations go, because we would have then enabled the continent's rise.